Auditorium. Our next session now is going to explore the future of the space economy. So this session is being hosted by the newly launched Centre for Space Futures, which His Excellency announced in his opening keynote presentation at the start of the day. So the Centre is an exciting collaboration between the Saudi Space Agency and the World Economic Forum and aims to build a thriving, sustainable and inclusive global space economy. Now, all of our participants here on the stage in the session are directly involved in the leadership team at the Centre. Our panellists are all board members, and I'm delighted now to pass over to our moderator for the session, Michal Ashamimri, who is the Managing Director. Michal, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, Your Excellencies and esteemed guests. I have the pleasure to have my board members on stage, and we will be addressing a really exciting topic about essentially space technologies, emerging markets, and the promise to transform the space economy in the next decade. So what we're going to address is emerging space technologies, non-terrestrial networks, the economic impact of satellite constellations, and the creation of space-based internet. We are also going to look at new markets and investment opportunities in space, as well as some of the challenges that are facing the space economy. With me today, we have Jeremy Jurgens, the Managing Director at the World Economic Forum, as well as Susmita Mohanty, Founder and Director General for Spaceport, Sarabahi. Cam, I think many of you know Cam. He has, if I count the companies, I think the session will be over. But he's the founder and executive chairman of Axiom, Intuitive Machines, and Quantum Space. And Martijn Blanken, the CEO of NSG. Thank you for for being with us today, and we're looking forward to what we're going to address. I'll give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourself and give the audience a little flavor for what you do on a day-to-day basis. Jeremy?
Great. Thank you. So Jeremy Jurgens, Managing Director at the World Economic Forum. I have the privilege of having responsibility for our Center on Fourth Industrial Revolution, where we focus on emerging technologies, which includes both space, but as well the quantum economy, biotech, advanced energy solutions, and AI, among other areas. And so very excited to be back here in Riyadh and also to have kicked off the Center for Space Futures with the team yesterday.
Thank you.
Unlike Jeremy, this is my first trip to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia. I've been in the space world for more than 25 years, and I've sort of worn very many hats. I've spent about 15 years designing things for living in outer space. Worked with NASA and Boeing briefly, and then I set up 3 small companies, one in San Francisco, one in Vienna, and one in India. I now run a space think tank, which is called Spaceport Sarabai. The idea is to provide policy guidance to the government to liberalize the Indian space economy and to make sure that India has a powerful voice in all international fora, especially when it comes to matters of consequence, like space debris, STM, and whatnot. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cam Gafarian. I run my family office called IBX. IBX stands for Imagine, Believe, Execute. Imagine a certain future, believe in it, and go do it. And the vision for IBX is to protect our home and find new home in stars. And as a result, I've been involved in creating companies that helps protecting our civilization, and also space companies that basically ultimately find our way to become an interstellar species.
And my name is Martijn Blanken. I started 7 months ago as the CEO of the NEO Space Group. I'm new to space in a way. I've been a telecom boy most of my life, so I go from terrestrial networks and even submarine networks to space. But I think there are quite a few learnings that can be drawn from the telecom sector and be applied here in space. And Dr. Al-Tamimi this morning alluded to it, that the Kingdom has decided to set up a national champion in space, which is the NEO Space Group. And very excited to make a a small but hopefully meaningful contribution, not only to the space economy here in the kingdom, but also in the region and potentially beyond.
Thank you. So my first question goes to you, Jeremy. So as a leader at the World Economic Forum, can you identify top 3 economic sectors that are currently being transformed by space innovation, and how do these transformations potentially reshape global economic priorities?
Okay, thank you for the question there, Michelle. So let me focus on top 3, and then maybe if we have time, I'll tease one additional one as well where I'm quite interested. So we did some research this last year trying to identify what's the size of the space economy today. And as we were discussing yesterday, there's a lot of debate what gets included or doesn't get included. Our estimate is actually we see the space economy growing about twice the speed of the regular economy. So, moving quite quickly. And we expect it to reach around $1.8 trillion by 2035. Now, within that, the largest component that we saw was actually in logistics, supply chains, and transport. And this is driven by, global navigation and positioning systems. So the kind of efficiency gains you get out of being able to understand where your vehicle is, where your products are, and where they are in the supply chain is actually extremely valuable. And so, a lot of us are familiar with using apps on the phone to navigate, but now we actually see organizations bring this kind of knowledge down to individual product level across their entire supply chain and actually getting efficiency improvements out of that. So with that, the size of that sector looks at about $200 billion today and is growing at around 12% rate. I think the second area that we identified is actually agriculture. Now, while relatively small, it's only around $5 billion today if you look at it directly, it's growing at 17%. And if you look at the indirect contributions, we actually estimate this closer to $400 billion. So this is everything from crop management, utilization in irrigation, chemical reduction, even pest identification in crops. And what's kind of counterintuitive is it's not necessarily the richest countries that can benefit from this. It's actually countries that actually have smallholder farmers, and if you give them the tools and capabilities they actually can get much more gains out of this because they haven't necessarily optimized their production systems until now. And the third area, and I think Martin would agree, is actually in the digital communication space. This continues to be important. It's growing area. But if I look at these top 3, kind of logistics, transport, agriculture supported by Earth observation, and then communications, these are what we've seen as the top 3 sectors. The fourth one, if I may add, and I think that we're actually, quite curious and interested in, is actually space manufacturing. So the ability to actually manufacture products in microgravity, low gravity conditions that are actually possible to do here. And so we can imagine that new capabilities becoming present in health, medical devices, but also, for example, in fiber optics and telecommunications. So a lot of opportunities. It's still a small area, but I think it gives a sense of the potential for space over the longer term.
Thank you. So it looks to me that the number that you shared in the beginning, the 1.8 trillion, might be a lot higher in 2035 than that number. So would you say that that number is conservative?
It's definitely conservative, and I think when we were going through the process of debating it, what do you include? Do you include satellite TV into that? Do you include navigation maps on your mobile phone? So we were on the conservative side, and I do think that as long as we continue the investment, we'll actually surprise on the upside.
Thank you. So my next question goes to you, Susmita. How are the Asian space powers, China, India, and Japan, promoting space entrepreneurship, and how is their effort leading to the creation of new markets and investment opportunities?
I think that's a very good question, because if you look at countries like India and Japan, for example, our space programs were an outcome of this ambition to use space as an enabler, for societal development. We didn't start off with a military intention in mind. And we've come a long way. For those of you who keep track of space things, India landed near the lunar South Pole, which is quite the accomplishment. So for the last 60 odd years, so India did its first sounding rocket launch in the early 60s, just to give you a sense of our vintage. For the last 60 or 6 decades, it's really been the government space agency that's been the primary driver of our space program. And it's only in recent years, in 2020, the government announced space reforms. So I moved back to India. I've lived around the world, worked with the Americans, the Japanese, the Europeans. I moved back in 2008. And a handful of us had been pushing for liberalizing the space economy to give the private sector the right kind of regulatory and, sort of technological support to go out and thrive and become competitive. So now we have a regulatory body which was set up after the reforms were announced, and we've seen a steep rise in the number of startups in the country. There are some 250 startups that are incorporated as of today, and easily 4 dozen of them, so roughly 50 of them, are doing exciting work. And let me give you a few examples just to give you a sense of what are the kind of products and services that are on offer. We have a company called Pixel that's building a constellation of hyperspectral satellites. We have 2 rocket companies that are 3D printing rocket engines, making fairings out of carbon composites. We have a company called Nopo that makes the world's finest single-wall carbon nanotubes. We have companies like Bellatrix doing green propulsion. We have a lot of downstream application companies as well, working on, say, insurance products, working with financial markets, agriculture, resource planning, oil and gas, what have you. So I think the spectrum of markets that these companies are now addressing, earlier the focus was really Earth applications. Now we are looking at companies that can offer you space situational awareness services, companies that can offer you, things like Earth observation, Earth imaging. That's been part of the Indian DNA for a long time. But I think low Earth economy that's opening up, the Indian startups are also looking at that, right? Now let's take Japan, for example. Some of the very well-known Japanese startups you might have heard. I mean, one is Astroscale. It's almost a decade old now. It's, as far as I'm concerned, the leading company in the world that is trying to offer services for satellite owners and operators to watch out, to track debris, to inspect debris up close, and to rendezvous, grab, and do a controlled re-entry and burn. In fact, they did launch a spacecraft earlier this year, which went very close up to a leftover shard from a H-2A rocket, some 50 meters, and I think that's sort of a precursor to the next grab and re-enter kind of thing. Another very well-known Japanese startup is iSpace. They attempted a lunar landing last year. It wasn't successful, but they've already raised another $69 million as a loan from 2 different banks, and they're working on their next mission. They are hoping to provide, in their words, they want to prospect, extract lunar ice and offer it to customers, as they say, in cislunar orbit. I mean, it's exciting to see sort of the entire gamut of offerings from Earth applications all the way to a lunar economy. China, I don't have a very deep understanding of how it works, but I do know, for example, China has more than 10 startups just working on rockets. And 2 of them have been fairly successful in the test launches. I would also like to sort of sum it up by saying that this March, the Japan cabinet, they approved, I think about 1 million yen, which is like $6.5 billion US, which will be dispersed over a 10-year period, sort of targeted investments in areas that JAXA thinks are of consequence for their space ambitions.
That's very interesting. I think a lot of these technologies we're also seeing in different countries, so it'll be really exciting to see who's going to get it done first, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely think, Michelle, this is going to be the Asian century, the 21st century. Things are shaping up that way.
Could I just jump in on that? I think another thing that's interesting with some of these companies coming out is they have very young teams. So, I've met with the team at Pixel, and I think, they're just like the Saudi astronauts here, providing inspiration to so many people. These young startup founders also are providing inspiration, because here you see basically kids coming out of the university, starting up a 3D printed rocket company or a hyperspectral imaging company, and providing services to global corporations. And they provide a role model within their own countries, but I think also globally around this combination of entrepreneurial talent with technology to provide critical services for society and the economy.
Absolutely. Thank you. So my next question goes to Cam. This is in regards to space infrastructure. What are the main engineering and logistical challenges Axiom Space faces in constructing the world's first commercial space station? And how is your company planning to overcome these challenges to ensure long-term sustainability of space?
Sure. First of all, I just wanted to echo what Jeremy said, that I think the $1.8 trillion is, in my opinion, way too conservative. I think I would not be surprised if it's 3 to 4 times that. And the main reason I say that is with the advent of AI, quantum computing, robotics, and other technologies, I think these are all accelerator forces that it's going to increase the space economy, and it's going to grow it dramatically. In terms of the question you asked, in fact, all the commercial space companies that I've created, in one way or the other, they really are more of a space infrastructure, right? They're more enablers for other things to do. In terms of Axiom Space, also Jeremy talked about space manufacturing. I think we are at the verge of a new economy, if you will, a new ecosystem, like maybe early days of internet. I call it LEO economy, low Earth orbit economy, where there are things we can do in low Earth orbit that we cannot do on Earth. And many of these are going to be force multipliers for improving life on Earth. And I just want to give a few examples of that. Bioprinting is a new technology that's growing by leaps and bounds. With the current International Space Station, we have the ability today to print corneas or retinas, if you will, in space. And all these technologies for the last 26 years that's been played with and experimented with in International Space Station, none of them have been commercialized. And our intention at Axiom Space is enable all these technologies to really be commercialized. So imagine a day where we can actually maybe print hearts and lungs, and for the people who need it, can drop it to the certain clinic in the future. Just on that one area. Jeremy also mentioned, fiber optics called Z-bands, where the current fiber optics on Earth today cannot carry infrared signals, right? In microgravity, we'll be able to do that. And by the way, the reason for microgravity is because of the lack of gravity, molecules can go exactly where they need to go, right? In fact, in 2025, we're working on 3 areas where we're trying to advance in low Earth orbit. One is orbital data center. This is another area that's growing, and actually we're working with some companies to do that. The other one is semiconductors. You can do semiconductors in microgravity space. And third area is pharmaceuticals. One other example I can give you is when you go to space, aging gets accelerated very, very slightly. In fact, 2 brothers, Kellys, experimented with this. We believe that there is something to do with our T cells in our body. So if we know what causes maybe the aging to get slightly accelerated, then maybe we can figure out a way to either slow it down or reverse it. Okay, so that would be quite interesting. We also know that cancer has something to do with T cells. So if we can find that relationships, maybe we can come up with a cure with cancer in microgravity environment. So these are things that I think sort of like hidden today, but as this new economy is growing, and I can give you another 10 different areas of things that you can do in microgravity that you cannot do on Earth. So doing that, now in terms of the question you asked, one of the main challenges has been cost of transportation, obviously. Just give you an example. When a space shuttle was going to space, the cost per kilogram was about $47,000 a kilogram, okay, US dollars. This is cost, right? With SpaceX, today the cost is about $15,000 a kilogram. That's not what they charge, but that's roughly the cost. So we brought it down an order of magnitude less. With the Starship, that might come down to about $150 a kilogram. Again, another order of magnitude less. And then maybe in the future, it will be like $10 a kilogram. So now can you imagine, with the cost of transportation going down, all the things we're going to be able to do in economy? And then, of course, going further, my other company, Intuitive Machine, we were the first company in the history of humankind, a private company in the history of humankind, successfully landing on the surface of the moon this past February. Our second moon lander is scheduled to go first quarter next year. And we're going to be doing something really cool stuff. We actually have a joint venture with Nokia to install a 4G network on the first surface of the moon. We're carrying a drill and a drone and a hopper that hops on the surface of the moon. So I can see a day where we can also have a habitat on the surface of the moon. So all these economies are growing. And as a result of it, there are these challenges with infrastructure and supply chain that is going to grow. I'm also really happy to report that this is really exciting. The last, about a month ago, we were given a contract at the Intuitive Machine for $4.8 billion to provide all the lunar communication for Artemis, for all the countries that are participants in Artemis. So it's a series of satellites. Just like on Earth you have GPS and all of that, we're going to have that ability on the surface of the moon. And of course, the other company, Quantum Space, we're dealing with this new generation of satellites that are multi-purpose, can stay in orbit much longer, and can work with precision orbit, can work even maybe fueling other satellites and other activities. So what I want to say is that fasten your seatbelt, because the space economy is coming, and it's coming quite fast.
Thank you so much. So as a summary, there's some challenges, but really the opportunities outweigh those challenges.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So my next question goes to Martin. Can you explain how breakthrough technologies such as AI-powered satellite coordination and miniaturized components are revolutionizing satellite deployment and operation? And what are the implications for global communication networks?
Thank you, Michelle. Look, I think it is important to start with the observation that technology is a means to an end, not an end in itself. One thing that strikes me coming from the telecoms industry, which, if I dare to say, in some aspects is a bit more mature than the space industry, is that technology plays a very important role in day-to-day conversations. And that's not unimportant. There's a time and a space to discuss it, but ultimately it has to serve a higher purpose. And when you talk about, for example, communications network, it's either you provide a better customer experience, you bring the costs down, it helps you to facilitate new revenue streams, or you enable things that are not possible. For instance, Cam and Jeremy spoke about microgravity applications. And what is a very common thing for sort of a decade and a half in the telecoms industry is software-defined networks. Whereas the decoupling of the data plane and the control plane, the hardware and the software are no longer intrinsically linked, they're completely separate. And allowing to operate satellites remotely through software and algorithms, or call it artificial intelligence, you can dynamically and reliably and predictably reallocate the resources, the capacity, the power within a satellite or within a group of, within a constellation, or even in multiple networks, multi-orbits, multi-frequency, all with the aim to deliver a better end-user experience or bring the cost down. Another good example would be collision avoidance, with the space getting busier and busier, not only with more and more satellites, but there's also more and more debris. It's going to be very, very difficult to manage that manually, so you need to have a database of known objects that fly in space, and you need to predict where they're going to go so that you can course correct the orbit of certain satellites to avoid these collisions. All these technologies serve a purpose, and I think it is super important you start with the problem that you're trying to solve and then work your way backwards. That's not always true. Some people would say, hey, Google started by a bunch of people who developed a browser and had no idea how to monetize it, and there's an element of truth in that, but I think in the vast majority of the cases, you'll have to start with the problem that you're trying to solve. And there are many, many problems that we're facing today on Earth that can be solved by applying technologies in space, because it's more difficult to do it here on Earth.
Thank you. So we can actually use that for our session today with the space debris situation. We can use the AI to make decisions for the satellites. So my next question goes to you, Jeremy, and it's related to policy and impact. Why is it important for all countries to develop their own programs, and what needs to be done to ensure that actors are able to reap the maximum benefit that space has to offer for their economies and societies?
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, I think it goes back to the benefits that we've been hearing from the panel here. There's so many benefits that the space economy unlocks. Why would we want to limit that to a few countries that have the full space technology stack? Actually, with the falling costs that we've seen in launch costs, but also falling costs for 3D printing, we have a lot of satellite companies here as well, so Earth observation, your kind of cost per pixel observed, is also falling dramatically. Wouldn't we want to open up those benefits to everybody on the planet? And I think that's also what we aim to do with the Center for Space Futures that we just formally kicked off yesterday, is actually make sure that we can extend the benefits of space to the entire global population and not limit it to people that have the kind of full stack of technology capabilities on space there. I believe there's something today, over 80 countries have established national space agencies. You have over 100 that participate in the UN discussions on space, and there's some other ones that we want to bring in. So I think the more that we can bring them in, then we can actually unlock those opportunities there. I think just some concrete examples. We've all been watching very dramatic weather events in the last couple of years. So, having earlier prediction of those events using AI algorithms, but also advanced monitoring, the kind of, hyper-localized monitoring of the events, then using satellite communications to get the messaging to people. We can actually mitigate some of the damages that are coming out of, extreme weather events and other natural disasters. We talked earlier about benefits to agriculture and other domains. So I think it's really important for all of us collectively, whether in institutional roles or whether you're in corporate sectors, to actively think around using the space benefits, the space solutions, and unlocking for as large a population as possible.
So, but how do you go to a country that has no interest currently in space and convince them to be like, hey, capitalize on what space has to offer you, and they're like, okay, well, we don't have a fund for that. How do you think we should tackle that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us maybe got into space initially because we think, it's cool or it's engineering technical challenge. I think actually, building on Martin's point, is actually shifting to focus on solutions rather than on technology. So when you can see that actually you can address current challenges with a lower cost from space than you can terrestrially, that already there is a big wake-up call. Second thing that we're actively doing at the World Economic Forum is actually building a national space policy toolkit. So it actually can help companies look at what stage they are in their kind of space journey, what capabilities they already have present, and then where there's other gaps. And in those cases, they may partner with other countries to fulfill those needs, or look to the private sector also to go into that space. So I think these kinds of tools that we bring forward, space will speak for itself. It's just we need to make sure that people are sufficiently aware of both the opportunities and the benefits that space can provide, and then it'll follow naturally. And I think that's also what will drive this higher growth rate in the space economy quickly, because people will shift terrestrial activities into the space economy because it's actually more effective and creates more value.
Thank you. That's very clear. We have a plan and we need to execute it soon. Susmita, my next question is on regulatory. What kind of regulatory landscape is necessary to foster emerging LEO economy and future of non-terrestrial resource utilization while ensuring long-term sustainability in space?
Right, so I think I'll have to break it up into two parts. We're looking at what kind of a regulatory landscape would we want in low Earth orbit, given that the LEO economy is now expanding at an enormous pace. I think for everybody in the room here, I'll just quickly introduce you to the concept of space debris, because it's important that you understand why space debris is dangerous and how dangerous is the low Earth orbit right now. So anything that's orbiting the Earth, it could be at 400 kilometers, it could be higher, is orbiting at enormous speeds. It could be the size of an aspirin tablet, it could be the size of a satellite. It's moving at about 28,000 kilometers per hour. If you're thinking in miles, it's about 17,000 miles per hour, and that packs a punch. So just take a look at the numbers here. I looked up the European Space Agency debris figures. The latest numbers tell us we have about 40,000 debris objects orbiting the Earth, which are larger than 10 centimeters in size, right? We have about 1.1 million objects between 1 centimeter and 10 centimeter. And believe it or not, we have 130 million man-made debris objects, which are between 1 millimeter to 1 centimeter. Now, this is a lot of debris, right? And if you talk to any space agency, or if you talk to the space station partners, we have to constantly monitor debris and move it, dodge your spacecraft, whatever that might be, out of the path of debris. So in terms of regulations, we have what's called the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which is sort of the pivot around which current space governance rests. But in my view, that's completely outdated. It was good for the time when it was crafted, because the idea was to sort of address this sort of the military space race and make sure that we don't sort of take nuclear weapons in outer space. But if you look at the debris issue, which has become more real and is, let me give you numbers, we roughly have 9,000 satellites, active satellites in orbit. About a decade and a half ago, we had about 1,200 satellites, right? And in the very first session right here in this room, I think the moderator had a very good question for the panelists, where I must admit all of them dodged the question, was if 2/3 of active 9,000 satellites are owned by a single company, does that worry you? If I were here for that panel, I would say it absolutely does worry me and should worry everybody, because not only is monopoly the issue, there are many problems. It gets in the way of ground-based astronomy. Your great-grandkids will probably see more machines in the skies than stars, which is not a very exciting proposition if you ask me. And I think it's a question of orbital occupation and a kind of a land grab. On one hand, we are talking about space being a resource which belongs to all of us. And here we have a single company that's planning to put up 42,000 satellites. So I think we do need regulations to make sure that access to this limited resource, whether it's spectrum or orbital space, is more equitable and cannot be in the hands of any one country or one company. It's a very difficult regulation to bring in, to put together, because I think we now live in a geopolitically volatile world, and multilateralism is starting to become less fashionable, let's put it that way. But we do need that regulation, I think, in the long term. The other question, the other part of your question, when it comes to resource utilization, if you look at recent laws, I'll refer to a couple of them. In November of 2015, when President Obama was in office, the US Congress passed a bill which allows American companies to go out to asteroids, to other celestial objects, and bring back material and own it. And this is unilateral legislation. And I'm going to read a couple of sentences from an executive order that President Trump passed. He came after Obama, if you remember. So President Trump signed an executive order, 13914, which was accompanied by an official statement. And I want all of you to listen to this because it is, if you ask me, of great concern. He said, as America prepares to return humans to the moon and journey on to Mars, this executive order establishes US policy towards the recovery and use of space resources, such as water and certain minerals, in order to encourage the commercial development of space. It's good until this point. Now listen to this. He said, the order reaffirms US's support for the 1967 Outer Space Treaty while continuing to reject the 1979 Moon Agreement. The order further clarifies that the United States does not view outer space as a global commons. I can read on, but I think that this kind of wording and this kind of legislation should be something that should be on every country's radar in terms of what the consequences can be. It could lead to appropriation of resources, militarization of space. So I think we need to, as a collective of nations, of people, start thinking of new laws, and we do need laws. We cannot just say that everything can be made possible by, encouraging responsible behavior, because we are now moving towards unilateralism and minilateralism, and that's worrisome.
Absolutely. I mean, we see the pace of technology and the pace of commercialization tremendously outpacing space policy and laws. And a lot of the space policies and laws are not fully developed to capture that commercialization aspect.
In fact, there's a lot of pushback from large corporations and even nations. So everybody is trying to promote the idea of responsible behavior, but voluntarily. And we know that that's not how it's going to happen.
Yep, we definitely need a change. Thank you so much for that insight. My next question goes to you, Cam, regarding commercial partnerships. So what roles do strategic partnerships with governments and other private companies play in achieving the vision for your companies like Axiom Space, Intuitive Machines, and Quantum Space? And how do these collaborations drive technological innovation and commercial viability?
Yes, the governments play really a huge role, definitely in my companies. We were just talking about SpaceX. There wouldn't be a SpaceX if it wasn't because of the government COTS contracts that really enabled SpaceX to be successful and many other companies. But let me more specifically talk about my companies, right? In case of Intuitive Machines, we received a contract for $118 million. And with $118 million, we were able to conceive, design, build, operate, and successfully land on the surface of the moon in a period of 4 years. Now imagine that. If this was supposed to be done with the government, it would have taken a lot more money and much longer. But it was a huge enabler for us to create this new ecosystem. And in our first mission, we had commercial payloads. And now we have 4 missions. We're building series of moon landers, and each one, the number of commercial payloads increasing and the government payloads decreasing. So I think the government can be a huge force multiplier, an anchor to create these space technologies to grow. Also, we just received this contract I mentioned in terms of lunar communication for Artemis, the same thing. It's going to be another enabler, and we're creating our own commercial network rather than using NASA network, if you will, for being able to navigate in space. In case of Axiom Space, we were the recipient of the contract to be the first organization that can connect to International Space Station while we're launching ours and operate jointly. By the way, I just want to say we're just so incredibly proud since I'm in Riyadh that we had the honor of being able to take two incredible Saudi astronauts, Rihanna and Ali, in 2022 to space. And I saw them earlier here today, and it was such an incredible thing. And one of the things that we sometimes forget is that one of the key things about space is it unifies humanity. It brings us together. It also inspires the next generation. I think more than 1 million, youngsters in Saudi Arabia tuned into that mission. The same thing happened in United Arab Emirates, where for 6 months we took an astronaut to space, and a lot of other young kids were tuned into that mission. And really proud to be able to take our next astronaut, one from India, one from Hungary, and one from Poland. And with a number of people in India, you can imagine how many people we can inspire there. And with Turkey was the first astronaut ever. So this is another one that is big. But anyway, with going back to the question, with Axiom Space, I think the government played another huge role in terms of helping us and continues to help in us being the first private company building the replacement, if you will, for International Space Station, with collaboration not only with the United States, but many other governments. I mean, we've now worked with 12 other governments, taken astronaut to International Space Station and collaborating with them. So I think it's a huge role. And the same thing is true with quantum space, again, working with the government to be able to do that. So I sort of look at the governments as an enablers, if you will, as something that sort of get us started to be able to go forward. And my encouragement is that more governments get involved. And as more governments get involved, and all of us have more interest in space, some of the things that she was talking about, I think, become more of gets more of an urgency situation, like space policy, and at the end, space belongs to everyone, sort of the concept.
Thank you so much. So while governments can be slow and not very cost effective, they can capitalize on the private partnerships to accelerate the innovation and push it forward cost effectively.
I tell you, there's nothing like the power of entrepreneurship and the power of competition, where you feel like you need to create. And I think I've heard this expression that the scarcity is the mother of innovation. And when you have competition and you don't have enough money, you come up with incredible amount of invention and innovations that never existed. And as a result, you accelerate. And if you sort of look at the companies in the United States, other parts of the world, in India and China and other places, this power of innovation as a result of entrepreneurship with some support, to kickstart these programs is the way to go.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Michelle, can I just add on just one thing? So Cam just mentioned the lunar mission for intuitive machines was what, 130 million US?
118 million.
So just to give you a sense, I think, when I started off in 98 with Boeing, I think there are three things that have happened in the last quarter of a century: agility, efficiency, and cross-pollination between all frontier tech, whether it's clean tech, nanotech, agri-tech, space tech, infotech. Earlier, all of these were in their own silos, and now they've sort of come together, which sort of exponentially increases the possibilities of doing things. But coming to the numbers, so every time India launches a moon mission or a Mars mission, is always compared to a Hollywood film, right? I think that's a very bad analogy. The reason I want to sort of tag on to the 118 million thing is, so India, even the government space agency, manages to get done, pull together a planetary mission between 18 to 30 months. It's a very compressed cycle compared to, say, a NASA, which takes 6 to 7 years for a planetary mission, which is why our price tag is much lower. And in a way, the space agency in India works like a startup. It has that agility to, organizational agility to bring together the team from the day the budget is approved, from the day to the day you launch, in a very, very compressed time scale. And I think private companies, new space companies do exactly that. The other thing I want to add is what Cam was talking about, microgravity utilization. I remember in 1998 when I started working for the space station program, Johnson & Johnson was trying to do things, wanted to, on the space station with Boeing. I think the other big change is red tape has come down, The bureaucracy of launching things or getting things to outer space, I think it's much less now. The other day I had a guy from Bangalore walk up to me and say, I want to bioprint tissue in outer space. And I told him to reach out to Axiom and to NanoRacks. These things were not possible, I think a lot of things have accelerated, compressed, and that's the exciting part.
Thank you. My last question is for Martin. As the demand for satellite networks grows, what are the primary challenges NEO Space Group faces in scaling operation to maintain service quality and coverage? And what strategies are being implemented to address these challenges efficiently?
Thank you. Look, if you talk about scaling operations, it depends a little bit on what role you play in the value chain. The NEO Space Group plays two. One, it's an owner and an operator of assets, and it evolves around the capacity usage ratio. It's an asset in space. It's quite expensive. You're making sure that you have the highest possible utilization. The fact, however, is that demand is quite variable and is aperiodic. Even, for instance, if you take the city of Riyadh, most aircrafts departure sort of after midnight until early morning. At that point in time, there is a high demand for capacity to facilitate the in-flight connectivity, but after that, the demand dips. So you need to come up with ways to dynamically allocate bandwidth to various parts around the world to get the highest possible utilization. Because one thing that I haven't heard too much of today, that clearly governments play a very important role in stimulating innovation in the space industry, but ultimately the private sector needs to make money, right? It's all good and well, but at the end of the day, investors want to see a return of their investments, even governments. That may not necessarily be a monetary return, but it will have to be a return, so that focus needs to be there. The second sort of role that we play is that of a service provider, where you manage complexity. If you scale things, things get more and more complex. If you look at the geospatial world, many users of geospatial data, remote sensing and Earth observation data, use a combination of high-resolution opticals, synthetic aperture radar, hyperspectral, multispectral, for a particular area of interest. Well, one thing is to make sure that the data is managed and aligned properly. The second part is to provide meaningful insights, because the data in itself doesn't do much. And that is a challenge that we're trying to address by using software. It is a software challenge. It's not a hardware. You need to write very specific algorithms that serves use cases to provide meaningful insights that help customers to make better informed decisions, respond quicker to events that either have already happened or are likely to happen, so that they can avoid it. So it depends a little bit on what the role you play, but I do want to, just like I said earlier, technology is a means to an end, not an end in itself. The second part is sort of we like to play is, ultimately, we need to return on investment as well, and so it sometimes is important to add to the conversation.
Thank you so much for the insight. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for listening. I think we can wrap up the discussion. I hope you got to see some opportunities in space, some of the challenges that are being faced, and how we can actually move forward, because the opportunities outweigh the challenges. And if you combine government and private sector, you can actually move forward and drive innovation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.